This isn't just a story, it's a cry from the soul of nature. There was blood in the snow. Not a pool, not a trail fit for drama, just a whisper of red, a thread of life unraveling quietly across the white. It curled from the edge of the forest like a secret, slinking into the goat pasture behind the farmhouse where everything else was silent, sacred even. The world held its breath in that Spokane winter morning. Each pine branch drooped with frost like nature itself had paused in reverence. Mark Harris knew this land the way a blind man knows his heartbeat. Every slope, every snag in the fence wire, every footstep of the goats he raised like his own kin, he didn't need maps. He had memory. And this red thread in the snow, it didn't belong. It was an echo of pain in a place meant for peace. His boots crunched like thunder through the glazed drifts, his breath rising like smoke from a quiet fire. The trail led to a place beneath a cedar, stripped bare and skeletal, its arms cradling the fallen like an ancient guardian. And there she lay, a juvenile lynx, barely 7 months by the look of her, twisted like a broken story. Her left foreleg bent the wrong way. Blood matted her chest, her fur kissed with frost and silence. She wasn't asleep. She wasn't dead. She was something worse, alive but fading. Her ears twitched once, barely, and then her eyes opened. And in them, not rage, not wildness, but something gentler. Something haunting, exhaustion, defeat, and yes, a flicker so faint it almost hurt to see, of hope. Even the wilderness groans in the ache of its own brokenness, but sometimes in our mercy it begins to heal. Mark's instinct shouted loud enough to drown out the wind. Walk away. This is a predator. Let nature sort what nature breaks. But his hands didn't listen. His heart had already moved. He took off his coat with a hesitation wrapped in resolve, knelt beside her slowly like she was something both sacred and sharp. He expected teeth, claws, nature's rebellion. But she didn't resist. She didn't growl. She simply let go, not of life, but of fear, and maybe into something else. An animal is calling, will you answer? Inside the old tool shed, with its cracked beams and forgotten tools, Mark made her a bed. Straw that still smelled of summer, a shallow bowl of water that trembled in his hands as he set it down. The wind outside had teeth, gnashing through eaves like a starving ghost. Coyotes yipped in the distance, they could smell weakness. But inside that shed, a small, broken creature lay in the quiet, curled like a question Mark didn't yet know how to answer. She didn't stir, didn't shift, didn't even blink. He checked twice before midnight, heart clenched each time the door creaked open. By 2 a.m. the temperature had dropped below 10 degrees Fahrenheit, the kind of cold that stops breath in the lungs, that freezes sorrow into the bones. Mark sat alone in his kitchen, lights off, hands curled around a coffee gone cold. Out there, in the barn, a wild heart beat under blood and frost, faint, fragile, fading, but beating still. He didn't sleep, not really. Just listened to the wind and prayed to something older than language. Blessed are those who shelter the fragile, for they shall become sanctuaries themselves. Morning came slow. The shed door moaned as it opened, and cold poured in like a wave, but she was still there, still breathing, still watching. Her eyes tracked him as if they remembered something, a face from a dream, a presence not feared but questioned. He knelt beside her, soft words spilling from his lips like a lullaby lost in time. She didn't flee, didn't fight. Just listened, the way a soul listens when it wants to believe again. She hadn't touched the water. Her mouth was too dry, her body too weak, her instinct dulled by the weight of survival. Mark returned with a plastic syringe and a bowl of warm water. Gently he lifted her head, careful as if holding a memory made flesh. Easy, he whispered. And this time she drank. Humans are waiting. Prepare yourself for the wild to change. Your heart, it wasn't trust, not yet. But it wasn't fear either. It was something in between, the fragile beginning of surrender. Mark called the Wildlife Center just outside Spokane. No answer. Another in central Washington picked up, only to say their vet was away. The rest offered nothing but apologies and instructions. Keep her warm, keep her hydrated, observe. And if she worsens? The silence at the end of that sentence was more cruel than words. Mark stared at her from the doorway of the shed, watching snowflakes drift into the threshold and melt. He could have let her go. Let nature reclaim her. That was the wild way, but that wasn't the way of his heart. He stepped inside again, sat on the straw beside her. His voice broke gently through the silence. "Luma," he said. "That's where you are. A little light in the dark." She blinked slowly, her breath fogging the space between them. When we name what is broken, we begin to heal it, and when we love what is wild, we begin to change ourselves. She didn't answer, not with sound, but with stillness, a calm acceptance. She let him stay. He placed his coat beside her, settled against the wooden wall, and together they sat as wind howled outside, man and lynx, bound not by power or ownership, but by a shared breath, a shared silence. Inside that fragile hour, something ancient stirred, a flicker of the Eden we lost, but never forgot. This isn't just a rescue, it's a miracle stitched with snow, breath, and mercy. She didn't run, not the next day, not the day after. Every morning Mark opened the shed door wide, offering her her wild, the trees, the silence, the call of coyotes and the law of tooth and claw, and every morning she stayed, not trapped, not tethered. Just choosing stillness, choosing him. Her leg, likely dislocated, not broken, began to heal. The vet on the phone had explained what to do. No sudden moves, no force. Just time, just care, so he gave her time, and he gave her care. Her muscles, once trembling, grew steadier. Her eyes, once glassy, began to shine. The wound along her chest slowly cleared. She began to lick the water from the bowl herself, one slow sip at a time. She accepted small strips of chicken from his fingers, eyes locked on his, not in challenge, but in recognition. The wild may never be tamed, but it can be touched, healed, loved. And that was the miracle, not that she lived, but that she stayed. Every day she could have vanished back into the shadowed world that shaped her, but instead she chose warmth. She chose straw. She chose the voice that named her Luma, and as Mark sat beside her each night speaking into the hush, he knew this wasn't just survival. It was something sacred. Something the wild had entrusted him with. Sometimes, the miracle isn't in what comes to us from the wild. It's in what chooses to stay. He didn't touch her unless he had to. Mark understood that healing wasn't only about medicine. Oh, muscle. It was about space, about trust, about not pushing the wild out of a wild heart. So he kept his distance. Every word he spoke was soft as snowfall. Every movement was deliberate, every offering placed at the threshold of her reach, a bowl of warm broth, strips of softened meat. Sometimes he just sat there, back against the shed wall, watching her from across the straw-strewn floor. And little by little, like a flower coaxed by sunlight, Luma rose. She drank, she ate. She strengthened. The first time she tried to stand on that damaged leg, she collapsed. Mark's heart lurched, but she didn't cry out. She just paused, looked at the ground like she was figuring out how to speak to it again, and then slowly tried again. That was the rhythm of her recovery, not swift, not glorious, just persistent. Mark built a run next to the shed. Fencing reinforced with thick beams, wire stretched like piano strings. It wasn't a cage, it was freedom with a railing. A place where sun could touch her fur and the wind could remind her of the wild beyond, without letting danger come too close. When it was ready, he opened the small gate connecting her world to the outside. And Luma stepped forward, not like an animal escaping, not like a prisoner released, but like a soul testing holy ground. Two cautious paws pressed into frozen dirt. Her nose flared, her ears tilted toward every sound. There were goats in the distance, mothers and clumsy, frolicking kids bouncing over snow mounds. One young goat noticed her, stared for a moment, then trotted forward in innocent curiosity. Others followed. Hooves crunched frost? It should have ended there. Predator meets prey. Wildness awakens, instinct ignites. But Luma didn't crouch. Didn't tense, didn't bare teeth or bristle, she just stood, watching. Even nature sometimes pauses at the edge of old instincts and chooses grace instead. A single goat came within inches of the fence, nose twitching, breath frosting the air. Luma lowered her head, nostrils flaring. No sound, no movement, just stillness. Then, slowly, she folded herself to the ground near them, front paws tucked. Beneath her like a guardian in wait. Mark watched from the barn window as dusk painted the sky. Her golden eyes flickered soft and slow. The only wildness now was in how strange and beautiful this peace felt. We build fences to protect, but sometimes they become the bridge between what we fear and what we learn to love. Each morning, Mark found her curled near the fence, lying not far from the pasture. The goats gathered near her like disciples drawn to something ancient and kind. They grazed, they nibbled hay, sometimes pausing to simply look at her. Luma never postured, never paced. She just watched, her body at rest, her soul perhaps listening. And then one morning, Mark witnessed something that cracked open. Everything he thought he knew about predators and prey. As the sun cracked over the eastern hills, Luma rolled in the snow, belly up, paws flailing, legs bent in a clumsy, kitten-like joy. Not hunting, not rehearsing power, just playing. And across the fence, one young goat began bouncing in small bursts, like it understood the rhythm. They mirrored each other, predator and prey, wild and tame, soul and soul, in the language of innocence. Sometimes creation remembers Eden, not with words, but with movement, with mirroring, with joy. Mark reinforced the fences. Not out of fear, but out of reverence. He added viewing panels, places where faces could meet through slats, where sound and scent could pass freely but safely. And still, the goats stayed close, even when the entire pasture was theirs. He saw it in the way they leaned against the barriers, not in fear, but longing. He saw it in Luma's calm, not just the stillness of a recovering animal, but the serenity of something that no longer needed to hide. And then, one afternoon, the boundary cracked open in a new way. A mature doe, gray at the muzzle and frost-tipped in the ear, pressed her nose through a narrow slat. Luma turned, Mark tensed. This was it? This was the test. But Luma moved slowly, gently, her body melting into the fence as if it were part of her. She pressed her face to the goats, cheek to muzzle, no claws, no teeth, just quiet pressure. A moment, a breath. A whisper between two lives that shouldn't touch. And then, with something close to tenderness, she nuzzled the goat again. The doe stepped back, then forward, as if drawn to whatever spell had just passed through the frostbitten air. Mark stood there, breath shallow, throat tight. This was no longer about survival. It was communion, when the wild lays down beside the weak. We witnessed not instinct, but a glimpse of divine peace. Luma no longer limped. Her body had thickened with health, her coat grown plush with winter's crown. Her stride had turned smooth, each step a ripple of gold and shadow. But what struck Mark more wasn't the power in her body, it was the stillness in her soul. She no longer jumped at sudden sounds. She didn't circle her run anxiously. She moved through the enclosure like it had always been hers, like she belonged there. So the day Mark opened the main gate, giving her full access to the pasture, he held his breath. He expected panic, from the goats, from her, maybe even from himself. But what followed was silence. Acceptance. She walked slowly, body low, not in predation but humility. The goats didn't scatter. One walked alongside her, another nuzzled her flank. By afternoon she lay stretched in the sun, a goat kid nestled against her ribs, asleep. Mark didn't film it for followers. He filmed it for memory, for proof. For the quiet kind of miracle that no one expects, but everyone needs, he ordered. More feed, more supplements, minerals for the aging does. Digestive support for Luma Jui deliveries came weekly now. The barn was cleaner, quieter, there was peace in the hayloft. Luma had become not just a visitor, but a presence, a balm. Then one evening, just before dusk, something shifted. A kid wandered too close to the old trough. Luma approached, slow, deliberate. Mark froze, but didn't shout. He watched. She reached the kid, lowered her head, and licked its face. Not once, not urgently, but with the deliberate rhythm of a mother grooming her own. The kid didn't flinch. The moment held. Something broke in Mark's chest. Not in pain, but in awe. He leaned on the gate, whispered with tears in his throat, "You're not just surviving anymore, you're healing." Snow flurried in the dusk. The trees whispered overhead. And Luma turned to him, golden eyes finding his, not tamed, not owned, but seen, known, part of something whole. The wild doesn't leave a note, but its absence writes a silence deeper than grief. The shed was empty. At first, he thought she'd curled up behind the trough again, or hidden near the hay. But when he stepped through the pasture gate, an unease settled on him like fog. Too quiet, too still. Luma was gone. The gate was shut. Fencing untouched, no signs of struggle, no paw prints, just absence, sharp and staggering. He circled the property twice, checked every stall. Every tree, nothing. The straw in the shed still held her shape, faint, pressed like a shadow. But it was cold now. And empty. That night he didn't sleep. The next morning he didn't eat. By the third, he took his flashlight and headed into the forest, the same direction where weeks ago he'd followed blood. Now snow blanketed the path in ghost-white silence. No prints, no trails. Just wind and pine and a man's voice echoing through it like a prayer. "Luma!" An animal is calling. "Will you answer?" Darkness pressed in and Mark heard nothing. Until he did. A flash of movement at the forest's edge, a ripple in the silence. He walked onward, light shaking over roots and fallen logs, each tree a question mark in the black. 1 hour passed, then 2. His hands trembled, his breath turned to smoke. Every step felt heavier than the one before, his hope dimming beneath. The pounding rhythm of his heart. There was nothing, no sign. No whisper. Only wind and shadow where Luma had vanished. Eventually he turned back, each footstep carrying the weight of absence. That night, Mark sat on the shed steps under frigid stars that blinked cold overhead. The goats had grown silent, the pasture swallowed in darkness. Inside the straw, the bed she had accepted night after night lay untouched as a forgotten prayer. Her scent faded, her warmth was gone. And in that absence something more stirred. A question: do wild hearts always return to the forest? The ache clung to him as he stared into the night where pasture met tree's darkness meeting shadow in a silent promise. He ran a hand over his face, jaw clenched, eyes unable to look away. She had grown confident, stronger, but still the ache disagreed. The forest had reclaimed its right, maybe. But what if home isn't where binding roots lie, but where trust was first given and first accepted? He whispered to the wind. Do wild hearts always return to the forest? The sound was softwood creaking on metal, a breath in the cold. He didn't know yet that something answered. Humans are waiting. Prepare yourself for the wild to change your heart. Mark was at the kitchen sink, mind adrift, heart racing. He stepped toward the window and froze at the sight beyond the barn in shadow. The night still, he opened the door. The air bit, silence pressed in, and then movement. A shape slid into view at the edge of the shed, his breath caught. Frost cracked underfoot. Luma was there, standing just outside the open gate. She looked thinner, fur dull and streaked with dried mud, but she held herself with quiet strength, not limping, not broken, just tired. Her eyes were clear, focused, not wild, not lost. She looked at him, long enough that time slowed. Mark held his breath. He didn't move, didn't speak. Without sound, Luma stepped into the shed, into the straw. She turned once, twice, then curled into the familiar space, same shape, same bed, same silent vigil. Her breath came slow and steady. And then it happened, a soft vibration, low and almost imperceptible, like a purr. Not a growl, not a whine, a tremor of contentment rising from her chest. Mark stood in the doorway, the cold forgotten. Something in his heart cracked open like ice falling. He walked in slowly and sat down just outside her reach, back against the wall. No words, no gesture, just presence. The shed glowed with peace and silence. Luma's eyes half closed, her breath rising in time with that trembling hum. Not a wild animal, not a pet, something else entirely. They shared that quiet peace until dawn. This isn't just a rescue, it's a miracle stitched with snow, breath, and mercy. By early spring, Luma had shed the fragile creature Mark once found in the snow. She moved with fluid determination. Her muscles coiled beneath lean fur, her leaps across the shed roof effortless, sentinel-like as snowdrifts around the pasture. Each evening she returned to straw bed without prodding, without markings. She was part of this place now, gentle, strong, connected. She didn't snap at goats, didn't flinch at their presence. They greeted her without fear. And Mark watched, hope tightening into something heavier. A lynx staying among goats? Wild bond formed of trust, a story for a viral YouTube moment. But it was real, it was deeper. He called a wildlife biologist. She's healthy? Strong, he said. Biologist, then she's ready. That night, Mark couldn't sleep. He watched Luma chase snowflakes with the goats across dusk, rhythmic, graceful, improbable. He leaned on the fence and whispered, "You think you're one of them, don't you?" The thought pressed deeper each time he repeated it. He knew she belonged in the wild, that instinct still called. But something fiercer than instinct lived here now, a connection between predator and humanity. Maybe we can't save every wild soul, but we can choose every day to make space for hope. A week later at dawn, Mark prepared the travel crate, straw lining. Favorite food? Luma stepped in without protest, the trust difficult to carry. His hands shook. He loaded her into the truck and drove through frost-chilled roads, past rivers and logging trails, to thick forest, silence deepening. Crate door opened, Luma stepped out cautiously. Once she turned back toward Mark, eyes calm, unreadable, then walked into trees without a sound. Mark stood in cold air, staring. No celebration, no closure, only hollow ache, the betrayal of love releasing trust. 8 weeks passed. Snow buried the pasture. Barn roof bowed. Winter sharpened everything. The goats drifted restless near the fence. Their energy unsettled Mark. He couldn't sleep. He chalked it up to weather, until midnight when motion sensor camera lit up. Monitor showed a shape at the wood's edge. Mark froze, pulled on coat. Boots crushed frozen ground. The world lay silver, snow across the pasture like waves. There. Beyond treeline stood Luma, pale eyes catching beam, unblinking. She had found her way back. He swallowed the ache, her presence wilder, deeper. She stepped toward him. Goats stirred. She paused at a call, then moved again across snow toward shed. Gate untouched. Fence untested. She walked into the old wooden door open. Into straw, into cedar and hay and memory. He didn't follow at first, just watched. Miracle by choice. Bond, deep as the snow was cold. When wild hearts remember, they don't return with fear. They return with intention. Luma returned on her terms. Each morning her tracks vanished into forest depths Mark never traced. By day she was myth among trees. By evening she returned silent as the dusk, paws soft on frozen ground, weaving through goats who parted to let her rest in the hay. One goat leaned its head against her shoulder as if she'd never gone. Mark watched from porch in silence, no interference. Just witnessing. She didn't need saving anymore. She had chosen where she belonged. Mark built her a small shelter beyond fence. Still she returned to the shed, or curled near goats on her terms. She hunted by day, wild in bones. But at night she looked at him with familiar eyes, not tamed, but known. Some bonds don't need fences. Some families don't match. Some hearts, no matter how wild, find their way home. Luma wasn't rescued, she chose to live. When the wild called her, she answered. But she returned too. Her return a memory, a bond, a reminder that what we fear is sometimes what we don't understand yet. Luma's story wasn't just an animal rescue. It was a miracle stitched with survival, wild bond, animal miracle. A touching animal story, born of human and animal connection. A dramatic wildlife rescue that became a real, heartwarming animal video. And for every emotional true story you share, you help support animal welfare, wildlife conservation. Maybe we can't save every soul, but we can choose to make space for hope.